Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so excited, delighted, and honored to have the opportunity to be with you here today. You see how excited I was because I jumped up even before I was supposed to begin speaking. Let me begin by thanking the hosts of this conference, COVAC and the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, and also the co-sponsor, Intel, and extend my personal gratitude to Minister Lee and to President Kang. I'm hoping, okay, here we go. Great. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the efforts of UNESCO in helping the international scientific community more effectively target its research to the challenges facing societies, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to secure more active popular support, understanding, and participation in science on the other. And to do both, of course, international collaborations are absolutely important. Whoops. There we go. Okay, I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the changing landscape of international science and engineering, and lead into the implications of that for UNESCO's roles across science, education, and culture. I'm going to focus a little bit about current activities in the natural sciences at UNESCO, including the topic of how internationalization, in fact, serves as a strategy for promoting creativity. I'm going to offer some thoughts about the most promising directions we can take collaboratively as an international scientific community, and offer up some new ideas for collaborations that I hope will interest many of you. So, a changing landscape of science, I'm dividing this into three categories. The one is there's a really dramatically changing morphology of international participation and leadership in science around the world right now. And there's also clearly a dramatic increase in the urgency of the challenges that are facing our planet, for which scientific and engineering solutions are indispensable. And lastly, there is in parallel underway a change in the practice of how we're actually doing science and engineering. And we need to keep this in mind as we think about the relationships between science and society. I am terribly sorry. I keep on pressing the wrong button. Maybe that will be the last time. So in terms of the changing landscape of science, I referred to you, many of you may not have yet seen it, the most recent edition of the UNESCO Science Report, which attempts to give a snapshot on what's happening in trends in international science. And what you'll see, I hope you can see from this diagram, is that there's an emergence of new players in science. The previous so-called triad of North America, Europe, and Japan still is a very dominant force. But what we're seeing is that there are rising new scientific superstars on the horizon. And among those rising superstars are Korea. But in general, there's nodes of excellence emerging in many parts of the world. That's the good story. It's a sort of a democratization of the morphology of science. There are some not so happy aspects of it. The least developed countries, science continues to lag far behind. Another interesting feature of international science is that the networks of collaboration are changing. In particular, we see a great deal more of the so-called South-South networks. And these two diagrams, one is research collaborations involving in-stage commercialization, and the other one is collaborations involving R&D. And what you'll see are there's nodes of very, very strong collaboration emerging, for example, between India and Cuba, between Brazil and South Africa, etc. So this is a very interesting and promising trend for the future of international science. In addition to this changing morphology and changing models of participation in science, as I mentioned, there's this increasing urgency of challenges facing the planet, and all of you will be very familiar with them, so I don't need to list them in detail. But in addition to the the phrase entering the Anthropocene has been coined, and it's clear that more than ever we need to have international collaborations to address these pressing problems. In addition to problems on a planetary scale, we have problems in providing access to healthcare, food, energy, etc., for a rapidly increasing population. All of these are coupled in huge challenges. And lastly, the world economic crisis places a huge burden on all of us. When we talk about changing nature of science, I think this is very important for us, those of us who are in the scientific education community. Of course, we see a huge blurring between disciplinary boundaries, between science and engineering, between science and natural sciences and social sciences, etc. We also see in the international scientific community a far greater willingness to embrace the responsibility for the policy dimensions of our work, instead of a past mode of doing research, publishing it, sort of throwing it over some sort of a unknown wall where hopefully somebody will do something with it. Another trend that I think is very important has been called the fourth paradigm by Tony Hay, the head of Microsoft Research. The fourth paradigm refers to the fact that during human history we've gone through a number of scientific paradigms, starting with empirical science millennia ago, moving to theoretical science for a few centuries, to computational simulations for a few decades, and now moving into the very data-intensive science in which the mode of doing science, the mode of discovering truths about our universe, shifts to interacting in imaginative new ways with mammothly large data sets. And it's very important, I believe, for science education throughout the world to keep in mind the changes in the practice of science as we interact with our communities. And lastly, there's another exciting trend related to the popularization of science, the phenomena called citizen science, whereby the capacity to contribute scientific data is really enabled by low-cost technologies and distributed potentially among millions of collaborators. So the challenges for our scientific communities, as we see them at UNESCO, are the following. Increasing participation has to be up there as one of the top, if not the top one, among our youth and particularly among women and girls. We need to continue to forge more effective alliances between international scientific communities, and the funding agencies around the world need to work together in a more coherent fashion if we really are going to more effectively address these challenges. We need to do a better job strengthening the link with policy, popular understanding and support, ensuring flow of scientific information, and lastly, continuing to build capacity throughout the world, especially in the LDCs. But I would say that capacity building is not only for the developing countries, that all throughout the world, including in the most advanced scientific societies, we need to do a better job in building our capacity to effectively address practical, complex, interdisciplinary challenges. So at UNESCO, we have a variety of directions. I'll describe some of them, but we see higher education as a strategic sweet spot. In other words, if we can transform our university systems to be more effective, it's a key strategic linchpin in the whole of our science, technology, and innovation ecosystems. And to transform our higher education systems, one of the key is to do a better job in integrating collaborative research, including across national boundaries, with our efforts at innovation in science and engineering education. And to do that, an international team-based approach, bringing together faculty, students, relevant partners from industry and civil society to address in a sustained, collective manner these challenges is essential. International collaboration on science policy instruments also needs to be promoted. And we also need to work on gathering the political will to move forward in a much more rapid and much more savvy way on political processes such as Rio +20. In other words, what we need is a new compact between science and society. Where does UNESCO fit into this? Many of you will be familiar with UNESCO, but the E is for education, the S is for science, and the C is for culture. So among UN agencies, we have probably the broadest mandate. We have active programs in the natural sciences, in social and human sciences, in education throughout the educational levels, in culture, and in